X teams are also externally oriented. We're living in an exponentially changing world. It's crazy out there. It's turbulent and it's moving faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. In that world, our mental model of that world is outdated almost by definition when we start a new task because it's changed. And so externally active is what X teams are.
Deborah Ancona is Distinguished Professor of Management at Professor Organizational Studies and the founder of the MIT Leadership Center at the MIT Sloan School of Management. She's also co-founder of XLead, a company that creates tools that assist in leadership development in a turbulent world. She is also the author of the book X Teams, so How to Build Teams that Lead, Innovate, and Succeed. 90 or 95% of my clients, they probably have exactly the two goals that you mentioned. Because when we went there in a conversation, the perception and pleasing people were the two strongest. So I'm not surprised they came out from your research, because that's really consistent with my own findings, although I'm not a researcher, but from coaching conversation, which is interesting because I think it's telling you something. The second aspect, which is more a question to go a little bit deeper. So how can people really, first of all, recognize what are their ghosts? Hi, everyone, and welcome back to a new episode of the World Class Leader Show. Today, I have with us, I'm very excited about Deborah Ancona. Deborah is Distinguished Professor of Management at Professor Organizational Studies and the founder of the MIT Leadership Center at the MIT Sloan School of Management. Pioneering research into how successful teams operate has highlighted the critical importance of managing outside as well as inside the team's boundary. And this research directly led to the concept of X Teams, we'll talk about today, as a vehicle for driving innovation with large organizations. So Deborah's work also focused on the concept of distributed leadership and on the development of research-based tools, practices, and teaching coaching models that enable organizations to foster creative leadership at every leader. She's also co-founder of XLead, a company that creates tools that assist in leadership development in a turbulent world. She is also the author of the book X Teams, so How to Build Teams that Lead, Innovate, and Succeed, and the related articles with that, and The Family Ghost in Executive Suit, which is one of the most interesting topics we're going to talk about today. In addition to X Team, a study of team performance have also been published in Administrative Science Quarterly, in the Academy of Management Journal, Organization Science, and of course the MIT Sloan Management Review. She wrote other books, but I think for the sake of the time that we're available, I think we can stop here. Deborah, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. So, Deborah, you have an incredible story of writing and studying and researching, which is not a surprise from someone that has an academic background, that keeps studying leadership and teams as you do, but also now you also have your own company, etc. So I'm very curious, because sometimes we speak with academics here in the show, although it's not always. So what is for you, what does it mean to move or to transition from studying things and teaching people about theories, models, etc., then to bring what you study or what you research on into the real life of organizations?
Well, good question. So I have always been an empirical researcher. So I'm not in the lab somewhere, divorced from reality. I've always done my work in organizations, studying real teams and real people. I've also been at MIT for the bulk of my career. And the motto at MIT is mens et manus, which translates into mind and hand. So we are a school that really promotes not just theory building, but how does it work? How do we take the theory and put it into the DNA of action? I have to say, at the early start of my career, obviously we're all in the academic world aiming for tenure. And so that means publish, or perish. So the focus was more on the academic side. But after a number of years, I guess I feel as if I know some things about how to help people to develop and how to create teams that are high performing and how to help transform organizations. So the balance has shifted, And it's been great fun to take those ideas and play with them and work with different organizations to take the theory and run with it. And of course, that teaches us more. It teaches us more about how to change the theory and what works and what doesn't work in the real world.
Yeah, I think it's feeding back to the theories, right? So when you apply the theories and models and into the real world, then you realize whether the application, the model itself, has some sort of flaws or can be developed in a different way. So I think that's a fantastic way of approaching it. So one of the topics I really would like to talk today with you before getting into the teams element, which to me, by the way, is a critical element of personally on my job. So I do a lot of work with leadership teams. So I'm very curious to have this conversation. But equally, I'm very curious to understand more from you all the element of the family ghost. What does it mean to have family ghost, in the reality? What's the implication? First of all, what are they? What does it mean having, the family ghost? And then what's the real application of that concept into the real life? And primarily, I'm interested in how that shapes people actions, shapes people performance.
Sure. So the idea of family ghosts is that your family behaviors and values and attitudes that you learned as a child in your family, and it might be extended family, it might be also some cultural elements, that sometimes, not always, but sometimes those attitudes and behaviors get transferred into the executive suite. That is, we are playing out some of the roles that we may have taken on, or the values that we have, or the shoulds. You should do this, you should do that. There are tapes that are playing out in our head and that are coming out in our actions that show up in the executive suite. And sometimes those behaviors are good and they help us, and sometimes they're not so good. And the way I kind of got into this whole ghosts idea, in addition to which, well, first of all, because it's really fun and interesting theory, is because when I'm teaching individuals how to develop and how to shift their leadership, what we call leadership signature, there are certain times when leaders just get stuck. There are things that they can move with and things that they can't move with. They get stuck in certain areas. And what I have found is that stuckness is often a product of early ghosts that get in the way of their ability to move.
Can you give me a couple of examples of some of the most, look, it's very personal. So, definitely not one ghost for one person, Mina is a ghost for many people, but there are some common ghosts that normally, show up in the workplace based on your research / your experience.
Yeah, so there are, we've identified quite a few ghosts, and I have now 10 years worth of data. So we're still going through those right. stories and trying to figure out. But so I teach mostly executives, almost primarily executives. So and I make them go through the family ghost analysis. So what comes out? Perhaps, again, these are my students, so they're very accomplished. They're really good producers. And perhaps the biggest ghost is the idea of work hard. You have to be perfect. You have to do everything right. And that has gotten them often very, very far in their careers, because if you're working hard, you tend to do well. And the counterpart of that, so sometimes ghosts are both good and bad. So the counterpart of the workaholic ghost is that you're a workaholic. You can't let go. You can't stop. Every I has to be dotted. Every T has to be crossed. Everything has to be done to perfection. And you begin to get burnt out and you can't stop. And so the work on people's development is, how do you keep that hard work and accomplishment, but not have it go so far out of control that you're basically burnt out and ruining some of your family relationships because you're working so hard, or other kinds of dysfunctional outcomes. Another one that we find is people who kind of the pleasers of the world. my job as a child was to please my parents. I wanted them
Yeah.
to be happy. I
Yes.
wanted them to like me. I wanted them to love me. I wanted them to feel proud of me. And so much of my life is about pleasing everybody. What do my bosses want? What do my peers want? What does this one want? What does that one want? I know personally that's something that I have struggled with over time. And again, the good news is if you're pleasing your bosses and you're pleasing people around you, then often they like that and they promote you and you get ahead. The negative, again, could be that you're just doing too many things for too many people and you're spread too thin. Another negative is being burnt out. And a third is that if you're so busy working on other people's agendas and trying to please them, then sometimes what you leave out is what do you want? What is your contribution? As leaders, you're supposed to have a vision, your own vision, and your own model of where it is that this organization should be moving. And so if you're too much into pleasing, sometimes you lose touch with your own voice and your own needs and your own goals. And so what we try to do is understand with people, well, where did that come from? And maybe you needed to please your parents early on, but you don't need to do that anymore. You're a seasoned executive. You can and should have your own agenda and not worry so much about ruffling some feathers. And so there are ways in which we take people through a development process.
Yeah, which I'm interesting, by the way, to go a little bit there because it's fascinating. And what I found extremely interesting is I have a different way of calling, but we discussed, remember when we had this conversation before getting you into the podcast. And besides the way, the different names that we give to this phenomenon is interesting because probably 90 or 95% of my clients, they probably have exactly the two goals that you mentioned. Because when we went there in a conversation, the perception and pleasing people were the two strongest. So I'm not surprised they came out from your research because that's really consistent with my own findings, although I'm not a researcher, but from coaching conversation, which is interesting because I think it's telling you something and proving, by the way, the research that, of course, you made. The second aspect, which is more a question to go a little bit deeper. Look, it's clear that whatever attitude or behavior that you created for yourself, that's essentially what you're saying from our past, very past, by the way. It's not like yesterday, but more rooted in our, when we were a child, etc., is showing up in other ways, still showing up now as an adult, but also during the work that we do. So is that very clear? It's consistent with my findings. I'm curious how you really, and by the way, what you also said, and correct me if I'm wrong, to some extent, that was your winning strategy. So it worked for you until a certain period of time to please others, to please your family, etc. And it's still winning, still, in service of what you're doing. But if you're going beyond that certain limit of threshold, it becomes actually something more counterproductive based on my understanding, right? So how can people really, first of all, recognize what are their ghosts? And second, how can you deal with these ghosts? Because it's something they created 20, 30 years ago. In my experience, it's not something like easy to snap. Let's snap and change it, right? So what's your strategy, advice, how to deal with that?
Yeah, so it's a good question because it's not easy. And again, we tend to think about organizational change or personal change as being, okay, you take a 360, you get some feedback, it says you should do this and go for it. So for example, in this day and age, a big thing is empowering people. You have to give others autonomy. In a distributed leadership world, we want to push decision-making down, and that means giving people autonomy. But for some people, their ghosts are independence. This is also frequent with people who have alcoholic parents or parents who weren't there. They needed to take control. They needed to be independent, to take care of themselves. but then it's not that easy for them to empower others, even though that's where the organization is going. They can't do it. Giving people autonomy is scary, because to give people autonomy in the world that they grew up in was a very scary experience. So part of the way that you can recognize your ghosts, well, there's several ways. One is just to go through our framework. In the HBR article, we, being Dennis Perkins and myself, talk about different dimensions of family systems, and that comes out of family systems therapy, Satir, different people who are writing in that domain. And so we lay those out. So what roles did you play as a child? What values and beliefs were part of your childhood? What boundaries were set? Was it tightly bounded family? If you're 2 minutes late, you get punished, or is it all loosey-goosey? It doesn't really matter. What secrets were there? How did you master your environment? So a series of things. So step one would be to go through the framework and identify some of those family patterns, and then ask the question, are those playing out today? And which ones are playing out the most today? What resonates the most? And it will be very different for different people. One guy said, I was the joker in the family. I used to joke all the time and everybody loved it. And I brought humor to the family. And so that was my persona. And it worked in college, and it worked as I was in the early stages of my career. And now I'm in the senior leadership team, and it doesn't work anymore. The feedback that I'm getting is that this doesn't work. You can't be telling jokes all the time. We have serious things to do, and it's inappropriate to bring that much humor into the situation. So number one is identifying those aspects of your childhood roles, identity, whatever it is, that are getting in the way right now. The second thing that you want to do is just become conscious of when that comes out and what's triggering it. When are you most likely to crack a joke? When are you most likely to do something that seems inappropriate? And by beginning to write down what triggers you, you can be aware of when you're most likely to engage in that behavior. And then the question becomes, what scares you about changing that behavior? Okay, you need to not be telling jokes all the time, but that can also be scary, because that's a core identity for you. That's an identity that people like. That's how you got ahead in the organization. So it's scary to think about changing. What's scary about that? And one of them is losing my identity. If I'm not that, what am I? How do I bring more functionality into the job? Once you've identified what scares you, then you move into a phase that cognitive behavioral therapists call reframing. You want to reframe what you're doing. So it's not that if you're this person, and I just use that as an example, whose identity is about being the joker or bringing that role into the team, the first thing is it's not either or. It's not, I have to give that up to be something else, which is very scary. Giving up any piece of your identity is very scary for people. So it's a both and you need a both and mindset in this day and age anyway. So I can be the funny person, but I can also be the serious strategist. So what other role do you want to bring forward? What other identity can you add? And then you can start saying, how do I manage these identities? Like I can bring the joker center stage when it's appropriate, but sometimes that identity needs to go off stage and my strategic, serious self can come forward, or my entrepreneurial self can come forward. And that's what needs to be center stage. So you go from either or to both and. And people usually have multiple identities. And part of the task of change is to figure out, again, what's needed now? How do I bring that center stage? Another way of thinking about a reframe is from hot to medium. So let's say that you want to be better at networking. you're not good. And again, for today's organizations, you need to have connectivity inside your team, inside your organization, in the bigger ecosystem. That's just what leaders need to do in order to learn and partner and do the work they need to do. But for you and for a lot of my students, this is true. Networking is bad. It's evil. It's political. It's demeaning. My work should speak for itself. All of those things. So there, what you want to do is reframe from something that's hot. So for you, negotiating is hot because it's bad and it triggers you in a negative way. So a reframe there would be, I need to get better at connecting inside and outside my organization to forward the needs of my team.
Yes.
So that's something that someone could get behind, whereas the politicking negative side is not. So how do you frame it in a way that's positive for you? And then another thing that, particularly for women sometimes have a hard time advocating for themselves, getting their voice out on the table. We're often trained early on not to do that, to adhere to male authority, to go and do these things. So I had one woman who just didn't say anything in the senior team when the senior, mostly male leaders were being directive of where the team should be going. And she's like, well, I can't go against them. I can't really say something that pushes against what they say. They're the authorities. And for her, going from self-centered to other-centered, I need to be the voice for my team in this organization. I need to be the one who brings my voice and my moral authority to this team. That's my job. It's what I need to do because that's my role in this organization. That's the role for my team. It's not about just me. It's about others. And so get at that other focus is another reframe. So there are lots and lots of different reframes, but that's another step in the change process is how do you make the change more palatable to you? And then finally, another change is to do what Herminia Abaris calls creating a provisional self. So this woman who couldn't speak up in the senior leadership team, it's hard to make that change. So what I get all of my students to do, or coaches or participants in workshops, whatever they are, or whoever they are, is to say your job is to find some role models. Find some other people. If you're a female, some of them should be female. If you are from a particular ethnicity, you might want to bring someone with that ethnicity into your set of role models and say, okay, who does this well? Is there a woman who I can see in a senior leadership team who speaks what she wants to say, doesn't seem like a braggart, doesn't seem like she's upsetting anything? How do I then become a detective? What does she do? How does she say it? What is her tone? How does she hold herself? All of those things are what you observe so that you can bring that in to your own set of behaviors and mimic it. So this woman was at a meeting, the senior VP said, look, this is what we're going to do. And she really disagreed with it. She still had hesitancy, but she said, okay, I'm channeling Elizabeth. I've been watching Elizabeth. I know how she sounds in meetings. And so that's what I'm going to do. And so she get up and she, okay, this is what Elizabeth would say. And I'm going to say it now. I'm going to use rational tone. I'm going to remain unemotional, not supercharged. I'm going to hold myself steady. All of those things went into what she did. So we get the role models, we figure out things to try on, and then we try them on an experiment, and then you experiment your way into a different self.
Yeah, which is role modeling, really. So looking at what person you can model, because it's showing a different behavior, so attitude that you really wish to have for yourself. So I think it's amazing. And By the way,
Just by the way, it's usually better, according to the work of Herminia Barra, not to have just one role model, but several, because it
yes,
may be she makes it akin to creating a new outfit. Maybe you want this person's skirt and this person's jacket and this person's hair. And those are different. And
yes.
someone might do this, but do it, they're too loud and you can't be that way, or they're too flamboyant and you don't want to be that way. So, what are the best things to borrow from different role models?
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's great. I think it's, look, my takeaway from the last part that you just shared is there are different ways of reframing. So you can create different way. There are different ways how you can create a different identity or narrative for yourself. And you gave some amazing example how to do it. Uh, but that definitely sounds like the for the most part, the real catalyst for that is your ability to see some benefit of embracing a different narrative, embracing a different way of being. Because until you don't see that, you're gonna probably go back to your own ghost and be, because they are more familiar. That's what you're comfortable with. So you have to find some benefits about changing, your identities, which is, I think, is great. So the second takeaway is just what you shared is trying to get the most out of the people that you admire, that you appreciate, because everyone has something, or maybe everyone, most people have something that maybe we like, and we should probably create a new narrative for ourselves based on the great things that we see in others, which I think
Yes.
it requires a lot of emotional intelligence, understanding more how people really talk, how they show up, how they lead. So it requires interest, curiosity, emotional intelligence. So that was great.
Yeah, that's you got it exactly right. That is what it is. And interestingly, one of our core leadership capabilities, we teach a leadership capability model at MIT Sloan, and that's where people get feedback on that. We have a feedback instrument as well. But one of the key capabilities that is we're finding in our data is more and more and more important for leaders is sense making sense of the context in which they're operating. And some of that is making sense of the larger context. So, what's going on in AI or what's going on in other kinds of things. But what you and I were just talking about is sense making around who are the leaders around me? What are those things do I admire? What might I bring in? And then observing yourself and getting some feedback on what you're trying on. So we had one guy who said, well, my people walk all over me. I can't really be decisive and say, this is what you have to do, because they never do it. And I'm going to try to be decisive. And so he came in and the next week to report out, and he said, well, it's not working at all, because I said to my direct report, well, it really would be nice if you did this. It would make a big difference, and we would all like you to do it. And so everybody in the class goes, that doesn't sound decisive. That's not what you practiced last
Right,
time.
right.
That maybe it feels that way to you, but that's not how it's coming across. So what is your demeanor? You have to be like this. Can you be clear? This is what I expect you to do. Is there a deadline? This is what I expect you to do by when. So you have to be sense making about what's going on around you, and also what you're doing and what impact it's having. So per what you just said, there's a huge amount of processing that is needed during these times of personnel development.
Yeah, I know, totally, and agree. And again, going back to the point that I said before, without being curious and be really interested in other people and how people, show up, it would be difficult to see, what are the data points that you potentially have that you can use to model yourself and to come up with something different. So you need to be really curious to try to get to see the most out of people, because sometimes I think we are much more by nature or interested into what people are missing or what are the flaws that they have, etc., not the good things they actually do. That's why it requires a lot of work on observing intentionally what is happening, listening, observing.
Yeah, and per what you just said, I think when students go through the ghost exercise, they realize, my ghost is operating now. Up that pushy ghost just came out. Oh, that perfectionist ghost just came out. Once you get the framework, I presented this work at a conference. Everybody's talking about their ghosts, but a side effect of learning about your own ghosts is just what you said, which is that people become more empathetic with
Yes.
others. They
Yes.
realize this guy, maybe he's obnoxious, but maybe there's a reason he's obnoxious.
Yes.
Maybe there's a reason that this person is having such a hard time changing. Because again, certain things we change quickly and certain don't, because once those ghosts start operating, it's harder to change. And the framework makes you more empathetic to the struggles of other people.
Which leads me to the next point. So if we transition to teams, because what you just shared is actually a fantastic way through open and transparent conversation about our own identity in the team, which is something I strongly recommend to my client, is having that. It creates a different level of trust, bond, and engagement with the teams because people understand better, why some behaviors might show up or might come up during a moment. That's why I think it's so critical for creating a condition for a team to operate in a different way. And that leads me to the second part of the conversation, the X team. So how what we discuss is in service of creating a high performance team, and what else you would like to share about that?
Sure. Well, I'm going to pick up on what you just said.
Yeah.
So I love that we can have the conversation. Is when I ask teams or executives, which I do all the time, what makes for an effective team, usually what they bring out first and foremost, and almost to the exclusion of anything else, are the kinds of variables that you just started talking about. So is there transparency? Is there trust among the team members? Do we know how to make decisions? Can we handle conflict? Do we have empathy for one another? Is there psychological safety so people feel free to disagree? Or do we have clear goals so that we know where we're going? All of those things are the models that I use this phrase all the time, but it's true. They're burnt into our brains. This is what we're taught. This is what makes a high performing team. And it's true. There's a lot of data that supports that. But we also have a lot of data that suggests that if that's your model of teams, it's only half right. And if you're half right, you can be very, very wrong. And X teams bring up that other half of the equation. So yes, you want to be transparent and have trust and work on all those internal dimensions, but X teams are also externally oriented. We're living in an exponentially changing world. It's crazy out there. It's turbulent and it's moving faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. In that world, our mental model of that world is outdated almost by definition when we start a new task because it's changed. And so externally active is what X teams are. And the motto, if you will, or the mindset of an X team is out before in. So before you set your goals, before you develop the team, you go out. You go out to understand, do your sense making. What's going on? How have our customer preferences changed? What do I need to know about AI?
Well
the political
done.
situation in the United States, well, not just the United States, in France, in Germany, everything is changing so quickly. What do I need to know about that? What do I need to know about where my competition has gone, how they're leapfrogging the technology? Who's doing the tasks that we're doing better than we are? How do we then go out, collect that information, bring it back in, make sense of it, create a map of what the new world is so that then we can say, okay, this is the product we want to create, or this is the process we want to go through, or this is the way we want to reshape the way we do programming. Whatever it is, it's out before in to do your sense making. The other external activity is what we term, and we as Henrik Bresman and I, building on work also many other people, but there's the book, X Teams, which is second edition, just came out in August. The second piece of what's important is ambassadorship. So your team is part of a larger strategic unit, and you want to make sure that what you're doing is aligned with that unit. So you want to get buy-in and support from senior leaders. You want to work to get resources from those leaders. You want to get their buy-in early so that they're supporting you along the way. If you wait till the end of we have this great idea and you present it, you're often going to have resistance because that person had nothing to do with what you're doing. So you want to get senior level leaders in early to align with what they're doing. And oh, by the way, that alignment is what enables distributed leadership. People can be innovative, but they have to be innovative in a strategic direction that goes with the rest of the company. And finally, you need to manage interdependencies. So you seldom do work on your own anymore, particularly in this fast-paced world. Okay, we were going to do all of this ourselves. Takes too long. If we're in pharma, we have a molecule. Maybe we need to partner with a biotech that knows how to get that molecule to the right part of the body. So that external interdependence with other parts of the organization and other parts of the bigger ecosystem, those are the three things that X teams need to do.
Which is interesting. I mean, it's all interesting, by the way. I'd like to ask you a little bit more about the notion or the concept of being a little bit more external oriented as a team, because I think what happens, by the way, that happens across organization where people become too much, inward focused because they see everything and only things that happen in their own organization, and they're missing opportunities. They don't understand what's going on outside. And I have to say, unfortunately, the current pace of business is not helping, because people have zero time to spend more, to spend some of the part of the days outside, meeting people, talking to people, go to the events, and you name it. So there is definitely a situation right now where having an external perspective is difficult. Now, it's not impossible because it's intentional, right? So it depends how you organize your time, how what you value. But when it comes to teams, I have to say, teams face exactly the same challenge. They become very much inward oriented. So they look at themselves as the only way to deal with challenges. And I think you're bringing a different perspective about the outside elements, which is one of the, based on your book, is one of the criteria for success. So is there, what do you think teams can really do when they're facing a situation where they have no time to spend outside because they are so much, involved in dealing with the current challenges and issues they're facing, or maybe whatever is the team performance deliverables that they need to achieve? Any practical ideas how these teams can start operating from an external perspective?
Yeah, great question. And I go around to many companies talking about the X team concept and sense making and the need to go out, and everybody says, we don't have any time. To which I respond, you don't have any time not to do this. You have got to do this. It has got to be part of how you work. So you can think about going in small steps. So you want to begin to kind of create that external muscle, if you will, that external orientation. So it may be, again, little steps. Okay, we're all busy, but we seem to be a little bit out of step with where our customers are. So next week, I'm asking every single team member to interview one customer in one of our key customer areas, one customer, and then report back next week. So you're only asking them for literally 1 hour of time to do this. And when you come back and everybody reports out, then you've got a much better perspective because you've got every 5-7 perspectives are coming in. And that could be the beginning. You could say, all right, now we need to go to slightly different kinds of customers and come in. Or maybe the next thing is some other group that you need fresh perspective on, because bringing that fresh perspective enables innovation. It gets you to think, oh, we thought we knew, but this information is very different. So what else do we have to know? So it sparks an innovative kind of thing with just a beginning of, okay, let's just start once a week. It may be that that you need more than that. So in one pharma company that I was in, they really wanted to do whole-scale change. And so they actually created a new X team to innovate. So it's not just taking existing. So step one is take existing teams and start Xifying. Start asking them to do more sense making, to make a presentation up to the senior leader team and get some buy-in. Small steps to hone those skills. A second thing is to create one or two X teams that are supposed to take on some strategically important task. So yes, you have to pull those people away from their given tasks, make sure that there's enough capacity to keep the trains running, because in this day and age, you have to be what Mike Tushman and Charles O'Reilly called ambidextrous. Yes, you have to keep the trains running, and they have to be running leaner and leaner and leaner. But if you don't innovate, you're going to be left in the dust. So a second way to do this is to create some X teams that are focused on innovation. And so, example, working with a pharma company, they were doing quite well. They had a lot of money, but they were falling behind on the innovation curve. So they created these two X teams who wanted to begin to say, how can we bring biotech within? How do we create a different way of working based on what they do? And so they spent 3 weeks just doing sense making and ambassadorship and task coordination. They went on a tour. They went to biotech companies, not just, oh, hi, how are you? But, whoa, our contracts look like this. Your contracts look like this. We're in the same regulatory environment. How do you do that? What do they look like? Oh, we always go to these suppliers. You're using these other ones. Why? What do they bring to the table? Do we need to change? So it's specific, really deep dives into what they're doing, going to competitive firms and saying, how come you're so further ahead on innovation? How do you do that? Why are your product cycles this long and ours are like this? So they went and did this tour, 3-week tour, talking to gurus in the field, consultants, other companies, etc. And then they came back and they had a lot of plans. They started doing ambassadorship to people higher in the organization, begin to bring others into their innovation plans so that they could not only go ahead themselves, but bring others along in the transformation. One guy sent me an email. He said, I've learned more about my industry in 3 weeks than I have in 10 years sitting at my desk.
There you go.
So you bring all this new way of thinking in and then set to work on how to do it. So that's phase one is you start small steps. Phase two is you create some teams that are leaders of new directions. And phase three is that you might want to inculcate an X-team program so that most teams begin to operate in that way. Takeda, I'm doing a lot of pharmaceutical, but this is applicable to many other kinds of organizations as well. Takeda, they knew that they needed to do more of these external partnerships. So we did in R&D a big X-team intervention that resulted in them realizing they had to go out more. In the X-Team book, we also look at Microsoft, so the tech industry is not just pharma, on how they, with Satya Nadella at the helm, are doing much, much deeper understanding of customer needs so that they can create innovative technologies for those customers. So that's an example. In tech, in sales, being out there and understanding more about where the market's going. So you can apply this in a number of different kinds of companies for different kinds of problems.
Yeah, totally. I have the last question about this before we wrap up is how the leadership team normally they perceive this, meaning, and most of your work is anyway at the C-suite, but do you see normally executive very open to the idea of creating new groups, new teams of people working around these areas, or sometimes you feel they are a little bit more reluctant because they feel like, they're maybe running too many initiatives, or they are not, again, they don't have the time, and also how much they are involved into this, because otherwise it become more like X teams everywhere, but us as executives, we stay where we are. So in other words, there is a way of osmosis between X
Yeah.
teams.
Well, so there's a huge range of where companies are. I personally will not come in and do any kind of X team program or intervention unless there's support from on high. Because
Of
what you
course,
don't want to
yes.
do is set up teams that are going to fail because they're
Yes.
shut down.
Yes.
And going back to we're back to ghosts, right? Senior level people are scared of losing their identity. They're scared of losing the identity of the boss, of the one in charge, of the problem solver, the things that they're used to being. So you have to deal with their resistance to change. But this, quite frankly, this train has left the station. And if you look at work by McKinsey, by Booz Allen, by BCG, they're all helping organizations to move into more agile, distributed leadership, nimble learning organizations. And so that's the direction. And those organizations are built on X team like teams to operate. And so more and more we see organizations coming and saying, please help us. We need this. We need to make this transition. Other organizations are not there yet, but more and more of them are. And they're putting the resources and time behind making it happen.
Totally. And I think it's a fantastic way to end this conversation, by saying, without the full engagement and endorsement of the executive team, any activity, in service of what you just shared is going to fail. So I think it's a fantastic and the right message to share.
Yeah. Well, there are some exceptions. I do want to say there are some exceptions because, for example, the pandemic is actually an interesting example where everything stopped and everybody knew that they had to do things differently. And it turned out for certain organizations, including hospitals and other kinds of companies, people who had been in X teams, people who had been innovating and coming up with new ideas, but they were stuck because there wasn't senior level support. All of a sudden, senior level leaders were looking for answers. Well, what do we do? Well, how do we do it? And there were these teams ready to go, ready with the examples. So you can do middle up. Often it's harder lower up, but the teams can work through their ambassadorship to convince senior level leaders that what they're doing is important and to let them have a chance. So you have a better chance of success if the senior leaders are open to it at the beginning. But there are examples of people who have said, you need to listen to us. You need to help us out because we have an idea, an innovation, a new business model that this company needs. So it's hard, but it's not impossible.
Totally. Well, that was brilliant. So, Deborah, we are at the end of this conversation. So where people should go if they want to know more about your work and what you're doing, your research, your books? What's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, so there are a number of ways to connect. LinkedIn is probably the best way to connect on that front. In terms of finding papers, you can go to MIT Sloan and look me up there. As you mentioned at the start of the program, there is a little company that a number of us founded, and there you will find access to a lot of my articles, as well as some tools that can help you either in your individual development. So we have a 360 tool, or you can learn more about X teams. Also buy the book, or there are lots of articles on X teams. Just put me in and you'll find X team articles. There's a Sloan management review piece that we did recently. But there's also at XLead, the little company, an X team simulation. So if you want to learn how to operate as an X team, that's a great way to go. And there are other tools that you can find at XLead if you want to follow up with some of these ideas in action.
Fantastic. Well, Deborah, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been extremely interesting and fascinating. So that is kind of the things that we want to bring on the show. So thank you so much for being with me today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for being such a great host and asking such great questions and summarizing so well. So thank you.
You're welcome.